This evening we're thinking about expressing love. So when the Bible wants to say, well, what's at the heart of this way of life that God shares with us, then it sums it up usually in terms of love. So in the prophet Micah, it says, what I want is not elaborate sacrifices, but it's to act justly, to love tenderly, to walk humbly with your God. And in Deuteronomy, picked up by Jesus, and in Leviticus, what's the heart of the law? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, and to love your neighbour as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. So we're thinking about the way that we express love, both individually and together as church. So the meaning of being church is a place where love, the love of God, is expressed in how we live, in what we do, and how we do it. But we didn't start these series of evenings with expressing love. We started with receiving love. The beginning is God. The beginning is God's love. And it's the fact that God loves us and creates us and calls us into being and is continually doing that, which enables us to even begin to express love. And we thought about faith as the way that we become rooted and established in love. So faith is trust that allows a relationship to grow and to deepen. It's when we trust what's important to us, to God, that we open ourselves to receive and become established in that love, to make that the resting place for our life. And faith as both letting go to God, that which is really important to us. And sometimes that feels a wobbly thing to do because we're not quite sure. We can wholly feel trust in God. And there's a sense of choosing, nevertheless, to let go to God. Even though I can't see the way, I will let you lead me. Even though it doesn't feel entirely safe, I will let go and let you have this that is important to me because you love me. And it's that trust that really enables us to feel and to become grounded in love. And then we thought about hope. Hope not just as wishful thinking, I hope my bus turns up quickly, I hope I win the lottery, all of that. But hope as, even though life might be a muddle and a mess, even though I don't feel I'm in the place I really wanted to be or planned to be, God is in this place. God, who is resourceful and compassionate and creative, is in this place. He doesn't mind that it's a muddle and a mess. He's quite happy to be here. And from this place, he draws us into life. He heals and restores. He makes things new. He brings life out of death. That's really, I suppose, where we got to, that sense that we live by faith that enables us to be grounded in the love of God. And we express that hope in the creative, resourceful love of God in action, in looking for transformation in our own lives and in the lives of the communities that we're part of. So we're thinking today about expressing love. When someone loves us unconditionally, it is transformational. We begin to believe in ourselves and we're drawn out of our negative attitudes and behaviours. And it's like the sun breaking through on a cloudy day. I think that's true. I think when someone loves you, it transforms you. And your own experiences of someone loving you in very practical, real, generous ways, and how that's drawn you into life. In the same way that, or the opposite way, when you live in an atmosphere where people are critical and can only, kind of destructive, you feel you shrivel. But when someone loves you, then you grow. Love is transformational. And this saying of a Christian spiritual guide, man of prayer, John of the Cross, talking about Jesus and his experience. You looked with love upon me, and deep within your eyes imprinted grace. This mercy set me free, held in your love's embrace, to lift my eyes, adoring to your face. Imagining Jesus looking at you with his love and the impact of that, and you see yourself for the first time as you really are. Because what you see in Jesus' eyes is love. What you see is your value. What you see is the beauty he sees and knows and desires to bring out in you. And you lift your eyes. So the love that we receive and the love that we give to other people has that power of transformation. It's creative. There's one word I'd want to use, about love. It's creative. There's nothing destructive about love. It's always about life, about building up, drawing forth, letting us live and breathe. Well, you probably know this reading from 1 Corinthians 13. It's a list of things, all the things that love is. So love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. That's quite a list. So that's St. Paul's list about love. So what I'd ask you to do, perhaps just talking to someone near you, is first of all, are there any other things you'd put in that list? That's Paul's list about what love is. It's these things. And hopefully a lot of those we might, agree with. But perhaps there are other ways that we think, well, yes, that love is also this. Love, another statement, another phrase. So that's one thing to think about. The second thing to think about is it doable? Okay? So when you look at that list, is it doable? So does anybody want to add anything, if you like, to the list, or make some suggestions about what else you'd want to say love is? Anyone have an offer?
Long-suffering.
Long-suffering, yeah? Yeah? Okay. Unselfish, yes, so not being consumed with what's good for me, but able to see the other person and what they need, yeah. Giving. Yeah, so it's that, again, it's about a kind of generosity, really, isn't it? Being able to give, yeah?
You can't just do love one day and not another.
No, so commitment, which goes a bit possibly with the long-suffering, in one sense, that it's not just about a day, a time, but something you sustain forever, yeah. Unconditional, yeah. So it's not, I will love you if, I will, you'll be all right in my eyes if, but it's free. There's no if or but about it. It's a free gift. Yeah. Anything else you would say? Non-judgmental, yes. So it's positively, it's accepting. There's an acceptance and a welcome, if you like, within that. So is it doable? I don't know. I mean, it's an even longer list now. To what extent is it doable?
If you're perfect.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's quite tough, isn't it? You know, actually try and put your name in front of all of those. You know, so Christopher's always patient, kind, all of those things. You know, might last it for a little while, but then the cracks begin to emerge. Now, what helps me with this passage is to put God in front of where love is. God is love. So, God is patient. God is kind. God is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. God does not insist in his own way. God is not irritable or resentful. God does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. God bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. God, who is love, never ends. There was someone who called Etty Hillesum, who was she was a Dutch woman in the time of the Second World War, wrote a kind of spiritual journal. She wanted to be a writer, wanted to write perhaps novels and poetry and so on. And she came to the conclusion that, she said, there is no great poet in me, but a little bit of God that might one day become poetry. And I wonder if you could put the word God there, the love there. There is no great lover, if you like, in me, but a little bit of God that might become love. God is love. God is the source of the love that we share. And sometimes one of the images that's used is the image of a spring. You think of when Jesus met the Samaritan woman who was thirsty for love by the well, and he promised her a spring that would well up from within and overflow and would satisfy her thirst. And the thing about a spring is it constantly renews itself. It doesn't exhaust itself. It's flowing from within. There's a sense of gift. Love isn't easy, and it's often there's an element of choice and commitment and long-suffering about it, as you said. And love is not the same as liking everyone or finding everyone easy. So we'll just kind of explore a little bit more. As I said, love never ends. It has no boundaries. God gives without ever considering whether it's wise to give so much, whether we deserve it, that unconditional sense. And therefore, we are to love, to relate in that same way. And love is the work of God within us, the work of the Spirit. And so it's the shape of God's life in us. Love takes the same shape as God does in what it does. God is creative, love is creative. Love is a creative thing. It brings life. Love is compassionate. Think of the compassion of God being expressed in Jesus being one with us and feeling our sufferings and pains and our struggles. Love is compassionate. Love is deeply practical. It's not just an airy-fairy feeling. It's something very real. And it's generous. And in abiding in God, we begin to abide in love. So the beginning is love, God's love, and the call to express that love, and always the connection between who our relationship, our response to God, and how we respond to one another. But we don't always feel love. I remember earlier this week, and I was feeling a bit sort of crotchety, irritable, and I was listening to someone. And I should have been all benevolent kindness and warmth and nurture and all that sort of thing. But actually, as I was listening, I was feeling irritable. I was feeling impatient. I was feeling a bit judgmental. And I was kind of aware of that. And I didn't want to be like that. But that's how I was. That's what I was feeling. Those were the things that were going on for me. And I suppose because I didn't want that, and I wanted something else, and asking God for something else, then something, slowly perhaps began to change in my attitude, because I could have just gone down that road of being irritable, of being judgmental, of being a kind of critical and destructive presence. It's very tempting sometimes being destructive, when you want to sort of diminish someone, put them down. And I could have gone down that road. And I didn't have the power in me to sort of summon up feelings of well-being for this person at that moment, warmth and generosity. But because somehow that's what I desired, as I continued to stay with a person to listen, then something began to flow in me. Something of compassion, of generosity, of being able to see this person and their struggles, and to feel what it was like to be them. And something of God being expressed in a time when there was not much in me that felt loving and generous. And because love is about God in us, then it's in prayer, in our need of God, that we allow God to be expressed in us. So love is sometimes a choice not to be destructive, not to will to diminish someone, but to will to build them up. And when we will that, then God's Spirit can begin to be at work in us. So love is the fullness of God, and when we love, we are fully alive. And it's like a river of life. The passage from Ezekiel 47 it's a story of water flowing from the temple, the dwelling place of God. And wherever this river flows, life teems on its banks. And alongside the riverbanks are trees that grow, and their fruit is for the healing of the nations. And this sense of life and love flowing from God, flowing from us, and refreshing others. And when the river flows into the salt waters, it makes them fresh. So that's something about the expressing love. I'm just going to hand this round. If you just turn over a few sheets to, there's a page that says it's got the giver and the gift. It's thinking about coming up to Easter and thinking about the love that's expressed through Christ and its impact on us. And this story is set in the house of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. And just to give a bit of background, the home of Martha, Mary and Lazarus was one where Jesus was welcomed. So in Luke's Gospel, it says that Martha opened her home to Jesus. So it's a place he came, and you have the story also about Martha and Mary, where Martha's doing all the cooking, Jesus has turned up, all his friends have turned up as well, Martha's preparing the meal, and Martha's sister Mary is sitting there at Jesus' feet listening, and Martha feels very grumpy about this. You know, why isn't she helping out? And Jesus says, you know, she's doing the important thing, and you worry and fret about so many things. So Martha, Mary and Lazarus' house was a house where Jesus felt at home. He needed friends, we need friends. It's a place where he received love. And Lazarus, Martha and Mary's brother, had fallen ill. And the disciples told Jesus. He hesitated, and then after some time, he decided that he would go. But when he arrived, Lazarus had already died. Martha and Mary came out to see him. Jesus wept for the love of his friend Lazarus. And then he asked that the stone be rolled away from the tomb. And he called out to Lazarus, and Lazarus came out from the tomb. And Jesus asked that his grave clothes be taken off him, unbind him, let him go free. And it was that act of giving life to Lazarus which put Jesus' own life at risk in John's Gospel. So there's a kind of a paradox in a way, that in giving life to another person, Jesus was freely choosing to put his own life at risk. And shortly after this happens, he comes to the house of Martha, Mary and Lazarus. And again, it's a meal. So I want to listen to the first part, particularly of this passage. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. There they gave a dinner for him. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those at the table with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept the common purse and used to steal what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She bought it so that she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." And just that first part of the passage in particular gives a real sense to me of that room. You know, I can almost hear Martha clattering away in the kitchen. I can hear the pots, the dishes as she's cooking. And the conversation of Jesus and his disciples, and perhaps there's noises coming from the street, and the smell of food. And people looking at this person, Lazarus. It's not every day you get someone who's been raised from the dead sitting at your dinner table and looking at Lazarus, and the sort of mumbled conversations that would be happening. And the atmosphere, of kind of excitement, but slightly pensive, worrying too about what was happening, fearing for Jesus. And then this woman comes in, Mary, and breaks open the perfume, puts it on Jesus' feet, anoints him, and the perfume filling the whole house. And what I'd like us to do is to see if we can use our imagination to enter into that passage. So if you like, to be there in the room. So what I suggest is if you put your piece of paper down, we'll hear the reading, the first part of the reading again, and then I'm going to ask you to, well, ask you now actually, if you wouldn't mind, just to close your eyes. And we're going to just use our imagination to put ourselves in the room. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. There they gave a dinner for him. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those at the table with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So see if you can picture that room where the light is falling in the room. A table perhaps with food. You might begin to hear the sounds of cooking in the kitchen. Sounds from the street outside. The murmur of conversation. And the smell of cooking. But put yourself in that scene. Perhaps you're sitting at table. You might be with Martha in the kitchen. You might be observing in a corner of the room. The figure of Mary comes in and kneels at Jesus' feet, and taking the perfume, anoints his feet and faces turn. The fragrance fills the house. Mary is looking at Jesus, and Jesus is looking at Mary. So just ask you to spend a minute or two in that room, in your imagination. You might be able to see the room, to hear the sounds, to sense something of the atmosphere. And you might begin to identify perhaps with one of the figures in the room. So we quietly use our imagination to stay in that place, to see what goes on. And when we're ready, we'll open our eyes. I don't know whether you would find that easy or difficult, but perhaps something came through, a sense of that scene, or a sense of you in that scene, or a feeling about what was happening. So just can I invite you again just to talk with perhaps somebody near you in twos or threes about anything that came to you as you thought about that scene. You were in that room, and where perhaps you saw yourself. What did you feel? What did you become aware of? Okay. Whether anybody want to just share anything you thought or you felt, or where you saw yourself in the story, or what was happening for you?
Karen thought of herself in the kitchen.
Yes.
I thought myself at the table sitting in the chair.
Yes.
I think my reaction would have been, I need this explained to me. Actually,
Yes. So puzzlement, really, almost. Yes.
because it would have been out of character.
Yes. 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 Anybody else? Anything?
We were thinking that it was a very risky action on Mary's part.
So it was a very, very expressive, risky, and a vulnerable thing to do in many ways, this kind of expression. Yeah. Yeah. It's quite a dramatic scene, isn't it? You know, that takes place. And actually, when you do read that passage, you can kind of begin to smell the atmosphere of it, the feeling of it, what it must have been like to be in that room. And why I think this story is important in this context is because there's two loves, I think, being expressed here. Now, on the one hand, this is the moment of Jesus' vulnerable giving of himself, that some would say was reckless. His disciples said, don't do it. Don't go to Lazarus. Don't go to Jerusalem. They're out to kill you. You know what happened before. Don't do it. Jesus decides to go. And the whole of the Passion story is about Jesus deciding to go. Because people are suffering, because people need me, because I feel their pain, because they need the life that God can bring. And his actions are generous, unmeasured, in that giving. But they're not reckless. Reckless is something about not considered. This is a very considered action on Jesus' part. It's the expression of who he is. It's the expression of love. This generous self-gift. And he's not thinking, are they worth it? Will I get anything back? He's not thinking any of that. And who's the person in the story who gets it? Who understands? It's Mary. It's Mary who's looking at this person and his need, and who wants to do something very spontaneous and generous for him. And she's not looking at what other people think or how other people will respond. And what she's doing is an unmeasured giving, and that's why Judas is so critical. But it's not reckless. It's considered. It's the giving of what she has for this person in need. And you get the sense that the love that Jesus has had for her has overflowed in her response And there's something about Mary's expressing the life that we are meant to live. It's about a way of living that's generous. You know, it's generosity is at the heart of God. Not measuring, will there be something back for me? But there's something generous about love. There's something considered about it. But it's an expression of what's in the heart. And the life that we are called to. So you may want to go back to that story. It's a bit artificial doing it in a group, but you may want to go back prayerfully into it and perhaps use some of the questions that are down here to think about it, and as we go through the Passion story. So what about not just on an individual level, but the level of church? So church love is about expressing God's love in practical ways and accepting each other, respecting each other, active compassion for local people. So are there any particular groups of people that you feel as church perhaps you are called to be mindful of, to express love for in practical ways at this time? And is there a way you might begin? Or any other sort of response of love either within you as a congregation or within your local area? What does it mean for Christchurch, South Nutfield, to express love in its life, in its mission at this time? Is that all right? So perhaps if we do slightly larger groups of 4s or 5s and maybe turn the chairs around. So just thinking about what expressing love means in the life of your church at this time, and any particular ways do you feel that could be expressed? I think, as I said, I think one of the things that for me from the outside has come up quite a bit, just in the 3 sessions, is the sense of relationships and building relationship. So perhaps that's something both internally within, as a congregation, and as we've thought about now, externally as well. And actually we live in a very private society, don't we, generally?
Yes.
Where we're suspicious of other people. We live in boxes, really. And sometimes we like that privacy, but it can also be quite destructive. And if the church is about anything, it's about community. It's about relationship. God is about relationship. So there's something there, in terms of a challenge and opportunity for all of us, really.